this background you have as a magician. I know that ties into somehow content marketing in some way, shape, or form.
I do this little magic translation in my brain that it's like a stage, a certain place on the stage to capture attention, and you have to connect with your audience. You have to know your crowd. All those sort of cliche metaphors of performance related to communication, there's a lot of overlap.
Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, Justin. Excited about our conversation ahead.
Well, I am too, because we were talking right before this, you have a lot of interesting things about you, but we got to stay focused today about content marketing specifically. And you've got some pretty good takes on that. But before we do, I want to ask you about this background you have as a magician. I know that ties into somehow content marketing in some way, shape, or form. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, interesting that it all sort of came together to end up in marketing. I still do magic shows. I got a magic kit for my 6th birthday. I don't know, it just stuck. And so through middle school, I was actually doing birthday party shows for my friends, and their parents would pay me to do magic shows for my friends' birthday parties, which was kind of wild. And then in high school, I met a guy who was an account executive at an ad agency, and he approached me and said that they had a large client, international client, that wanted a magician to do some promotions for their accounts. I was like, okay. And so that relationship lasted another 16 years. And so as I got to hang out at the agency, and, that was at the tail end of the Mad Men days, and got to see all the cool stuff that was going on in an ad agency, I decided that's what I wanted to study in school. So I started working at ad agencies. And then there was this fork in the road where digital marketing and, the internet and all that came about. I think we're sort of in that world right now with AI. And it was just really the lens that I saw how to communicate with folks through. So I have produced shows for theme parks. I had a corporate event at the MGM in Las Vegas. I had a magic theater in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I was on the Food Network doing a show with Buddy Valestro from The Cake Boss. So all the while, I think they were feeding each other. And so, like, if I look at a website, I do this little magic translation in my brain that it's like a stage, and a certain place on the stage to capture attention, and you have to, connect with your audience. You have to know your crowd, all those sort of cliche metaphors of performance related to communication. And so then somebody asked me a while ago, like, how would you have somebody start like a content strategy? And we might jump into it, but I just kind of looked at my hands and I goes, well, a magician uses their hands for manipulation and sleight of hand. I can attach it to a hand. And so we can jump into that. But yeah, that's kind of the path from being a magician to being in the marketing and digital space. And I would say there's a lot of overlap.
What's interesting about that is there's two ways to look at magic. One is deceit, and the other one is delight, isn't there? Right? You can look at it from a skeptical point of view. Same thing with marketing. Same thing with businesses trying to sell. There's that, definitely that connection as well. As you were talking, I was thinking about that. Like, some people would say, well, this marketing is all one big, marketers get a bad rap for being deceitful. But nobody looks at a magician thinking, well, how are they being deceitful? And that's not how magic works. It's meant to entertain and delight. And I like the way you put that earlier about looking at a website as a stage, and you're always thinking through that lens. It sounds like you're thinking through that lens of how can we delight? How can we connect with the audience? This is not marketing's not meant to be a deceitful. It does get a bad rap because people do use it that way, because you can. That's not a good way to do it, but how can we use marketing as a way to connect with our audience? That's my takeaway from that. I thought that was kind of cool as you were talking about that. Well, let's talk about that. You gave me a beautiful setup, a beautiful tee up there, that next point about the hand analogy. Tell me about that. Cause I was, when people come on a podcast, there's questions we ask about their experience. And that was one of the things you thought you put in there. And I thought it was good, because it's rare that somebody I talk to has a defined holistic philosophy about things like you seem to have. So tell us a little bit about that hand analogy you use.
Yeah. And just to pick up on the last comment you made, I have a TEDx talk that talks about your personal abracadabra, and how, when I do a magic trick, somebody says, hey, I'd like to be able to do that for other people. And I go, well, yeah, but really you want to bring joy and wonder to somebody else. And so if you think about that from a business perspective, you should be so excited about your product or service that you're wanting to tell the story about that. And so I think one of the hardest things for people to do is to understand storytelling and to understand where do I start. And so as I started to process that through that lens of magic and bringing that joy and wonder to an audience, I just held up my hand. And so some of y'all might be watching on video, some of you may be listening. So I'll kind of explain what I'm doing. But if we start with the pinky, that's related to that pinky promise that you made as a kid on the playground, right? And so you locked pinkies and you said, I pinky promised that. And you didn't break that promise, or you would have a bad reputation on the playground. And so, what promise are you making to your customers, to the prospects that are coming through your lead channels, to your employees, to your vendors? What are you willing to stand behind? Is there a way or a point of view that you go about doing what you do from a service perspective that you believe is the right way? Tell the story about that. Explain that. That gives shape and form to your business. If you create a product, why did you choose the materials that you chose? Why did you go about the way in which you do what you do? So when everybody's trying to compete on price and giving coupons and telling there's a $99 special that ends on Friday, you can sit there and go, yeah, we're not in that world. I'm promising you that you will have the best experience. Da, 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 da. Now, obviously, when you make a promise, you have to deliver on that promise. And so that's part of that brand building. And, a lot of people say, oh, well, how do you create a brand? You've already got a brand, whether you like it or not. If you don't proactively take control of that conversation, your audience is going to form that opinion, whether you like it or not. And so this is a proactive way to step ahead of that. And the first step is, what are you promising and what can you realistically and consistently deliver on? So the ring finger, I call it the ring finger because in the US and many countries, you wear your wedding band. There's actually a legend that there's a vein that goes from that finger to your heart. They call it the venus amoris. They disproved it, but it's still a cool story to tell. But yeah, a lot of people think that's about commitment. Actually, it's about the passion that you have in that relationship. And so, if you're married, you met this person that you wanted to spend the rest of your life with, right? And so there's also a courtship that happens. You don't ask them to marry you on the first date. So are you offending people by getting to the close too quickly? How are you respecting that relationship? And is this a long-term relationship that you're interested in, or are you just interested in making a quick buck? And so there's a lot that plays into that passion that you had for the business, the passion that you have for creating an environment for people to come work with you as employees. And then what are you bringing to that relationship with a client? So that's another one that has a very rich potential for stories.
How are you leading them along in the natural way that relationships work with humans, from first touch to client, and then developing them as a client, right? And how are you pursuing that relationship? It's a good analogy because even once you are married, you don't just stop dating. You could, and that's not good. But you've got to still develop that relationship once you are married. It's a good analogy. Tell me about the other fingers.
My wife and I just celebrated 20 years and it's been ups and downs, but we're still together and happy. So the next one is the middle finger. So a lot of people think that's a vulgar expression. It's actually an expression of defiance. So I would liken that to the enemy of your brand. Who are you proverbially flipping off that you believe is not right for your customer? If you truly believe your product or service is the one for them, then you should identify that villain and you should call them out. And that could be a person, it could be a company, it could be an ideology. And I'm not saying that you should name the company and say they're horrible, but there's certainly people are familiar with their choices in the marketplace and they're going to understand how you're different. And so I think in any kind of story, you have a villain, and there's a reason for that because it creates friction and tension, and that's what makes a story interesting. So you need to call that out.
Yeah, I just did a video about that a few weeks ago about, do you know your villain as a business, right? This idea that the story brand framework of Donald Miller clearly, points that out as one of the items of the 7 points of a good story. Is one of them is knowing the villain, identifying the villain, and calling it out. That's a good one. I think it's super underutilized. It's also what I find when I personally want to go create some content is the most effective at generating ideas, because it's very easy to get riled up when you think about the villains of your business, but specifically the villains of your clients' businesses, and why often it's a reason why we go into business. is the villain of our clients. And if we're similar to our clients, not always that case, but if we're similar to our clients, sometimes it's the same reason. So it's a easy, passionate thing to get unified around. And yeah, let's rally around this thing.
Yeah, everybody wants to champion for a cause and defeat the villain, slay the dragon, whatever the metaphor. And you brought up Donald Miller. He's been very successful. That came actually when he was working on the movie that he released, and he had taken some courses with Robert McKee, who's a screenwriter. And then Robert McKee is basically taking what Joseph Campbell had outlined in his book, A Man with a Thousand Faces. And so if anybody wants to do any background check on that, those are some sources that you might be interested in.
That's a cool background. I didn't realize that. All I knew was Donald Miller. I didn't know any of the back story behind that. That's neat.
Yeah. So Robert McKee wrote a book called Story. It's a great book. The next one is the pointy finger. And the pointy finger has a lot of texture to it. I think we all remember the Uncle Sam poster, "We want you." You're pointing at somebody. Well, who are you pointing at? If you don't know who your audience is, then how are you going to talk to them? Right. And so once you point to them and identify who that is, then you can turn your hand over and beckon them into your company and say, here's what we have to offer. Welcome. And, that's really that invitation for that first coffee date. And introducing them to who you are. It's also a symbol for number one, and that's a singular point of focus. In any piece of content, you should be talking to one person. You should have one big idea. You should be solving one problem, and you should have one call to action. Otherwise, it gets really confusing, and the story gets muddled down and defocused. The other thing the finger does is it points up. Hopefully you're taking your business and taking your client in a positive direction. And so there's a lot of texture around that pointy finger. The thumb. The thumb is the universal symbol for everything's going well. So that can be internally, or you doing what you need to do to make this company work. If you turn your thumb down, that's bad. So if you're talking with a prospect, you can say, do this, don't do that, right? Thumbs up, thumbs down. It's also the thumbprint. What legacy are you leaving behind by operating this business? What thumbprint are you leaving on your customer, right? It's unique. I have 3 sets of twin nieces and nephews. They can open each other's phone with their faces, but they can't open it with their thumbprint. And so that's unique to you. What are how is your business different than everybody else? What are you interested in? What do you spend time on outside of work? People are interested in that. It rounds out the character. A lot of people talk about a brand. I view a brand as a person, the customer, not as an avatar, an ICP. It's the hero on an epic journey. You mentioned Donald Miller. The more characteristics you can give them as a character who is trying to overcome an obstacle to win, it just feels better. And then you have all these characters that come in. You should be the guide helping them. There's people in your company that maybe have the secret sword or the magic amulet that's going to help them along their path. And so it just is a more creative way of thinking about storytelling and content overall.
Well, I really like that 5-finger analogy, the hand analogy you're using. It's a cool way to look at the framework of what makes for effective marketing. Holistic marketing. Often as founders who know nothing about, really, you don't know what you don't know. We know maybe a part of it, and we think marketing is just a very specific tactic. And we're going to dive into that here shortly because you have some interesting take on a specific tactic. But I really like that you covered that first. I was thinking, this is so helpful, having this framework of having, these are things to consider, philosophies to buy into before you do any specific tactic. Because if you employ a tactic without, you could call it a strategy, but we'll just call it a mindset at least, you're not going to be as effective. You're not going to be as effective in more ways than one. And so I come across that a lot. People saying, well, we tried that. It didn't work. That's one of the worst things to hear in marketing. I'm sure you've heard it, Jimmy, right? It's like, oh, we tried fill in the blank tactic. It didn't work. And it's not that it didn't work. It was at the right message at the right time with the right person in the right way. Using the fingers is a cool way to look through that lens of, is it actually a good fit for you actually? And often, sometimes it can be, it's not the right tactic, but more often than not, it's other things going on. So with that flavor of that 5-finger analogy, tell me about what's been working for you in the content marketing world.
Yeah. So I read a statistic at the end of last year that in 2025, video will be responsible for 82% of content on the internet. And you think about that and you go, okay, I know it was coming. 82%, that's insane. Why is that? People don't want to read anymore. We talk about snackable content. We, um, obviously, the expansion of everybody trying to copy the TikTok approach with Reels, and now LinkedIn is pushing vertical content from video. It should be sort of a slap in the face to folks to go, if you're not on video, you better. And so somebody sent me, and I didn't even know you could do this. They sent me a request on LinkedIn as a video from their mobile phone. So if you are on LinkedIn, you can film yourself or whatever you want and send a DM request as a video. And I mean, this has probably been 18 months ago. And I went, oh, I'm going to open that. Absolutely. I'm going to open that. So they got my attention. They got permission for me to use my thumb and click the video, but it was a very nice message. It wasn't a hard sell. It wasn't going for the marriage proposal right out of the gate. And I thought, wow, that was really smart. So they've differentiated themselves. They've just really wanted to be helpful. And so we have a large demand gen team at Thrive, and we all discussed and we thought, let's see about helping people out. And cold email has sort of got some, bad vibes about it. But if we do it in the right way, we think it could be helpful. And so I recorded, I can't tell you how many videos that were used. There were a variety of people in the company that filmed videos. We tried all sorts of messaging frameworks. And believe it or not, we're getting some pretty impressive open rates and follow-up rates for appointments. And so then you sort of reverse engineer that and you go, why? Well, you've activated curiosity. You have talked about them to make that connection. You are being original. And again, a year from now, this may not work, but people want to click and they want to be entertained. So if that's what's happening on the social platforms, why can't that be translated into some other medium? Obviously, you can't send an email through a cold email. It's going to get probably flagged. It's going to go through, especially if you're sending it to companies, it's going to get put in a spam folder. But there are ways that you can get that video clicked on and seen. And I mean, I know y'all work with a lot of video approaches, and thought I would bring that up just for something for folks to think about.
You're talking about like an embeddable GIF type. That's, when I think of video in an outbound message, it's like a Loom type video. Is that tools like that you're talking about?
Yeah. And I would say there are platforms that we use like Loom and Zoom so that it becomes a video message from a well-known platform as opposed to our email server. So you may think in those directions. I know some of those platforms are understanding that people are doing that, and so they may turn off that option. There are other tools. I think BombBomb is one of them where you can send message up. And so, yeah, I would say again, we talk about tactics. I think what we're talking about is the core understanding of how to get somebody's attention and communicate a message. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, how many words is a video worth, right?
Tell me about this this idea, because this is something interesting to me. So this is relevant to me because in our agency, I've come across that video tactic and gotten feedback from my team when I've done it. I've used just the native LinkedIn ability to send a video on mobile. You can do it natively there. You can't do it on desktop. Why I haven't done it at scale like your agency has is because it seems like video is like too soon of an intimate type of content format for first touch. And so we decided, well, let's just do what people are comfortable with, and let's maybe follow up with an audio and things like that, and maybe video down the road. It's surprising and doesn't surprising, but it doesn't surprise me that at scale, though, it can work. Do you ever get feedback from prospects that it's a turnoff, or maybe they're not saying anything? Maybe they're just not. But I mean, you're getting better open rates. You're getting better follow-up rates. So that's got to mean something, right?
Yeah. So I think the approach that we use, and I'm happy to share some of this if it will help someone, there are various software tools where you can, through AI, upload a spreadsheet with the URL of that prospect, the video asset that I have created, a series of screens on our own website that talk about what we do for that particular type of industry. And what ends up happening is it becomes a small introductory presentation that shows their website on the screen with my head down in the corner. And that is, if you're talking about like an animated GIF on the delivery, when they see their website in that GIF, that is very intriguing. And it's not just my head. There's obviously we test, A/B test, and change the script. And like I said, I would venture to say hundreds of videos with variations. They used to be longer. We wanted them to be shorter. So yeah, you've got to just test. And I think approaches are different for every company, and what may work for us is not going to work for the next person. And you just have to test. You just have to go, I'm not going to get married to this. I'm going to let the market tell me what it is. What ends up happening is that lead will come into our sales team, and we have a round robin situation where if a lead comes in, it goes to the next person in line. And those people ask, where is Jimi? Because they have had a relationship with me on the screen. And I will need to get on some of those calls just to bridge that gap from it being my face, and they want that connection point. And I think that's amazing.
I agree. It's people build trust with people, not companies, right? You can build trust with company. It's a completely different long-term strategy. It's just so difficult to do compared to people, where we can build affinity for a person way faster than we can for a brand. So it makes sense for you guys to leverage that. So one of my main talking points here, dialogue, is, if you're trying to be a founder, your company, you're trying to build your company, you're using the same playbook that everybody else is using, which is this idea that you're trying to build a brand. Again, nothing wrong with building a brand, but takes a lot of money, takes a lot of strategy. It's harder to do than if you can lead with the people in your organization, not just your salespeople, but use a founder and the decision makers who can connect with the other founders and other decision makers of the clients you're trying to attract. And it's totally why video works. It's because it helps bridge that gap sooner. And that's why thought leadership works. There's this study out there from LinkedIn and Edelman a couple years ago. They did it when they found out that they surveyed decision makers, executives, and companies. And these folks said that the study showed that 9 out of 10 decision makers were more open to sales and marketing efforts directed at them when preceded by good thought leadership. And good thought leadership doesn't come from a company. It comes from a person within the company. So highlight your people. You're going to be way more effective. So that's an underpinning strategy why this works. Just sharing a screen of what you're showing without showing your face wouldn't be as effective if you weren't in the videos, right?
Yeah. And then with large language model results showing up now, as Google released AI mode in early May, what's happening is those folks, the founders, executives, people within an organization that are showing up in articles, in blogs, in social media, those companies are actually getting found online higher than other companies. And so when you look at the algorithm favoring the EAT, EEAT, which is experience, expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, if you're just pumping out chat GPT content that's very, mayonnaise on crackers, I like to say, it's not going to get found. You're going to be lost. You're going to be invisible. And so you have to feature subject matter experts, provide that credibility, authority, all of that. So I would say in the past, when you talk about personal branding with a founder or people within an organization, it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of a nice to have, but that's a little egocentric. I would say at this point, it's vital. Like companies cannot ignore it if they want to be found.
Literally, because you're saying these LLMs have built into them this authority experience they're looking for, and how do you have authority experience if you're not a person sharing experiences, right? You can opt from a company perspective. Certainly, you can certainly create a blog about your company's experiences, but a company's experience is made up of the individual experiences together. And so, what better way to talk about your experiences than share your stories? And I talk about that a lot. I get a lot of pushback these days. I don't think we're in the age of AI. I think we're in the age of founder-led, executive-led storytelling. And I think we're so early to that. People still think we're in AI. No, I think AI is it's a tool. I think the real thing that's happening behind AI is that people are recognizing, oh wow, I've got to step it up and I've got to tell my stories rather than just let my marketing team use another tool to make us more efficient and write a bazillion blog posts. And so I think I agree with you. I think the companies that are leading from the front who are the leaders leading from the front with their content are going to be the winners long term, because or despite of AI, whatever you want to say there.
I was just going to say on a technical term, a technical slant, when you do a search, the way AI is evaluating that search is it will take that initial query and then it does what it calls a fan search. And it basically is like your fingers spreading out and it's looking to see who fills the slots in those fingers of that fan. And the more data points and the more times your business pops up to fill that fan, that returns the result. And so when you go back to creating this three-dimensional character of the company, that involves all the things that we've been talking about. And it's not just a one lever. You have to sort of be omnipresent in a variety of areas.
And that ties in beautifully to why I think companies should be video first to be omnipresent. You start with the video, you can create all the other content, instead of having to reverse engineer a blog by getting a quote from the leader. It's a great method, a great way to do it. Well, thank you for sharing that video strategy. I mean, we could talk about that all day. And it really, these strategies do really depend, these tactics, I should say, like this video, this outbound tactic really does depend on some of the systems you have built in around it. Like what's your offer? Who's your audience? Right. Can you give me a little taste of the offer you give these organizations? It sounds like you're doing different kinds of organizations, different kinds of offers just because of the scale of your agency and how many different kind of businesses you help.
Yeah. So I think you have to look at what is important to someone receiving that. And what they're probably experiencing is a drop in lead flow. And we offer an evaluation and a plan for free that we have various tools that we can see how visible they are in their marketplace. We work with a lot of home service industries that are paying quite a bit for leads through like Angie's List and other places like that. And so if you know your cost per lead, and we can have a business discussion about that, then we're taking it from we can get you more impressions online to here's how we can increase your lead flow. And then we have case studies and testimonials that we reference in that video to say, for instance, we were able to help XYZ company that's similar to them generate X number of leads per month. And so in their head, they can qualify that as better or worse than they're currently getting. And then that typically triggers the request for a meeting.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're having a just straightforward business conversation with these organizations. Here's the pain point you may be experiencing, whatever, lead down, whatever the word I'm looking for, and then point them to, we've solved this problem for one of your peers. Here's an example. And if you're interested, book a call. Yeah, very straightforward stuff. Nothing crazy fancy about that. It makes sense. Well, Jimmy, anything you want to leave us with, and then where can we learn about you? And we'll wrap it up there.
Yeah. So we've been talking about video the whole time. I made a commitment at the beginning of the year that I would post a video every day, Monday through Friday on LinkedIn. So I think I'm up to like 138 videos. So check those videos out, message me on LinkedIn. Happy to jump on a call and chat more about the stuff that we've talked about today or anything that's on your mind. And then Thrive Agency is just like it sounds, thriveagency.com. Lots of great resources on that site. I have a blog that I do every month that accompanies has a 20-minute video teaching some principle of digital marketing or storytelling or use of video or whatever. So I think those are some areas people can investigate further.
It's a big investment in your team's time, investing 20 minutes in a video to educate. Wow. That's pretty cool. Well, Jimmy, thank you for being here. I learned a lot. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Justin. It was fun.